Okay. So don't worry about how I threw a piece of geometry in the scene. We're going to get to that, but I need it in here to reference some things. So right now, all I have is it's just a polycube. It's a basic primitive. But we have some options in our viewport on how we can view things that we're working with. Okay. Up here in this upper left-hand corner is where we can make some changes, basically. We'll start with the plus. If I click on that, couple things that we could look at. We're not going to go through all of these options, but I think I'll point out some of the more useful things that will be relevant to the things that we're going to be doing. This first one is our X view. And we've got some options in this X view that are really nice, that provide us some information as we're modeling. One of the things that I like to have up is this overlapping vertices feature. And what it's going to do is down here in the bottom of my viewport now, it's going to say, hey, I've got this feature turned on, and I've got the ability to come in here and click to configure it. Now what this is doing is it's telling me if I have vertices, or it's going to highlight in my viewport and show me that I have vertices sitting on top of other vertices in space. Generally speaking, we don't want that. It means we have faces also sitting on in exactly the same space, which is considered a polygon error. We don't want that. We'll talk more about modeling errors next week, but what I'd like for you guys to at least start with is just to turn this on, and when we have issues, it's going to highlight it and tell us that we have issues. So how we configure that is if we click on the click here to configure, what this tolerance is how far out it's looking for vertices to be considered sitting on top of each other. I keep this as a really low value because occasionally I'm going to have edges and vertices that are close, right? So I don't want it highlighting everything that's, within a reasonable distance, but if they're sitting right on top of each other, I need to know that there's a problem. So this just gives me information. It's not doing anything about it. We would have to go in and do something about it, but this gives us information to let us know, hey, look at this thing, right? So on the overlapping, I'm just going to give it a nice little value, like a 0.001, and I'm going to hit OK. I don't have overlapping vertices right now, so nothing's highlighting in my scene. But when I do, and I'll show you an example of when I do here in a minute, I'll show you what it looks like. Okay? Other things we could potentially look at, the show statistics is kind of nice. It's going to give us information about our scene as a whole. This is going to eventually be really useful for us when we're building low poly models and we're having to be conscious of our poly counts or our vert counts. For games specifically, our goal is to try to keep that as low as possible while still make it visually appealing. Right? And the reason for that is we want our frame rates in our game to be as quick as possible. In order to achieve that, we don't want models with really high poly counts. It's just too much to calculate. Now, I will say this, okay, with that all said, it is getting to a point where we can get away with actually a lot more now than what we used to. So it's becoming less of a thing, should I say, but you do still want to be conscious of it. So I usually like to have this up just to give myself some information on what it is that I'm working with. Okay. Other than those two kind of main things, we can go in and also configure our viewports here. This is just another area where if I wanted to change, let's say, the layout of my viewports, I could do that. I could turn on safe frames. So what that's going to show me is what would be included in my render and what wouldn't be, but there are other ways that we're going to actually do that. We can change background color in here. So yeah, we're not going to mess with this area a ton. Ooh. Okay, actually we are going to change this. I was looking for this yesterday and I couldn't find it, and I'm really happy to have just discovered it on the spot talking to you guys. Okay, so in our statistics tab, we want to do our total and our selection. And I'm going to hit OK. It's going to give me an extra column. So whatever I currently have selected, it's going to show me the stats for that particular thing. Okay. Where this becomes particularly useful is if I'm selecting a region, and you guys aren't doing this yet, I'm just showing you, I'll show you how to do it here in a second. But why this is useful is, remember me talking about that vertice sitting on top of a vertice thing a minute ago, and that's bad? Well, if I select a vertice corner over here, and I expect to see only one vertice, but it's telling me that I have two selected, that's another way for me to know that I have a problem. So between these two things, you should be able to head off issues before you get too far down the rabbit hole. Yeah. Oh, I haven't gotten there yet. Don't worry about it. I'm just showing. I want you to look at the number. I want you to pull the numbers up and just see them change. I'll show you how to access it here in a second. Yeah. So it's under the X view, and it shows statistics. Okay. And how I got the selection option, the second column, is I went into the configure viewports option, and on the statistics tab, under setup, I chose total plus selection. Which is really, really a useful tool. When I'm working in Maya, I have it on all the time, pretty exclusively. I just forgot how to turn it on in Maxon, so yay, there it is. All right, cool. So those are two things I would like for you guys to have on while you're working. Just to get used to having it on, and then also using it as a visual aid, and providing some information on what it is that you're doing. Okay? Sure.
How can it have an FPS if you don't have animation?
No. Yes. What is FPS in Max? I don't remember. It's not. No, it's not referencing that.
Sorry.
Yeah, because you would. That would be a horrible frames per second. FPS Max. Okay, hold on. Oh, it is, but it's not. Okay. Let me get back to you on what it's referencing specifically within your statistics. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's go to the next one, where it says perspective. This is where we can go in and we can change our view. So we can adjust this from a perspective view to an orthographic. We can also change it to our top, bottom. You're going to notice that these top, bottom, left, side, right, all that stuff, those are naturally orthographic. Okay? It's not going to let you rotate, which is one of the reasons that you would go into it, rather than choosing orthographic specifically. Orthographic, once you're in it, you can rotate, which is annoying. Because typically if you're going into an orthographic view, it's because you don't want to rotate around an object. You want the flat view. So my recommendation would be to utilize your top, bottom, front, back, left, right. Okay. But occasionally, and you can see in this orthographic, that's rotated in orthographic. That's weird. It's taking perspective out. It's very strange. So generally speaking, we're going to stick either in perspective, or we're going to jump back and forth between these other options. Every once in a while, go into orthographic. It can be nice on the fly, but I usually don't use them. If I'm going to go into an orthographic view, I'm toggling in and out of my appropriate views to do it. All right. Okay.
Quick question. How do you just not have anything selected in the bottom? Like those, you know, the zoom and the pan tools in the bottom right?
Hmm.
How do you just like not have anything?
Are you trying to get out of it?
Yeah.
Right mouse click in your scene.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's it. So anytime you guys are in a tool or you have, well, actually I should just say if you're in a tool and you're trying to get out of it, if you right mouse click anywhere in the gray space of your viewport, it should get you out of it. If for some reason that's not working, up here in the in our toolbox, we can just click on this selection option, and that'll get us back to kind of a more of a quick select feature, and it'll remove us out, or it'll move us out of that tool. Yeah. What's that? Escape? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not. That's not a one I use, but yeah, if it works, great. Cool. Okay. Okay. All right. This is an area too that we can go in. This is a little bit easier area in my opinion to turn on our safe frames. What the safe frame is showing us is what would be included if we were to render this out. Anything outside of the safe frame would not be included in the render. Anything inside would. For our purposes, we're not going to worry about this for the moment, but I want you to at least see where it's at. Okay. One over where it says standard. We have the ability to adjust how our material is actually being seen within our view. We're going to leave this at standard for now. Once we start creating some geometry, I'll come back to this and kind of show you what changing some of those features does. What I will say is it's giving you a preview, and I want to emphasize this, a preview of what your stuff might look like. It is not indicative of what it actually will render out as. So don't use it as your end-all be-all indication in terms of how things are looking. Always, always refer to your render. Does that make sense? Your viewport is an approximation. Okay, that's it. All right, and then we've got our default shading. This is just going to allow us to go in and change up our kind of look and feel of our objects. Because our goal is to go in and add texture maps to this, we're going to leave this at the default shading because eventually our materials are going to take over and how this looks. The other thing with this is right now this material, this is how this will render. If I start changing this like to a clay view or a flat color, I was toying with some of these a couple days ago. I thought was really interesting and strange. It does not render that way. So it's a little deceptive. So we're going to keep this at our default shading for what we're going to do in here.
Why would you?
I don't know. It's not a feature. Honestly, it's not a feature that I've used much. So,
So it's like something that you like to work with that type.
this would drive me crazy. I mean, it's kind of cool, but
Illustrator might like it.
maybe? I don't know. This is so
Not
strange.
showing you what you're really real. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of weird. And it doesn't just change the material on the geometry. It changes the background and everything with it, which is weird. Did you guys ever use this in comparative?
He showed it to us. Do you remember Perry?
To what?
Do you remember Perry?
Yes.
He used the graphite one exclusively, like all the time. I don't know why,
Really?
but some people like it, I guess.
This would drive me crazy.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, one of the cool things with the 3ds Max, if this is fun for you, I'm just going to show this as a great, because it relates. There's a plugin for 3ds Max that is awesome, and I used to use it. I've been meaning to repurchase it, but I use it at the studio a lot. It's called Final Tune. Let's see. It's by a company called Cebus. Oops. Uh-oh. There you go breaking things. And it changes your renders into some really, really fascinating, like this, for example, is kind of what it was making me think of. This is an actual render using that plugin out of 3ds Max. And you can do some really interesting, no, that's not what I wanted. Some really interesting renders utilizing that. All of this stuff. So you can utilize a 3D package to make it look like a 2D animation. That's why a lot of studios are actually switching over to using 3D packages for 2D animating, because there's a lot of efficiency in it. Once you have your characters all set up and your rigging all set up, you don't have to redraw stuff. You just have to animate what you want to animate. Give it a look and feel like this, to mimic a 2D style, and you're off to the races. Whereas with exactly, yeah, exactly. The economies of scale are really nice. It's a big deal. This is all CBUS stuff. Like, just gives you some really fun renderings. So, hey Jerry, can we steal you for a second? Thank you. So eventually, if you guys want to toy it with Final Tune, it's one I recommend. I love it.
Basically just like creates some.
It creates materials that are a little bit more challenging to create just in the Max interface itself. So it'll give you outlines, it'll give you tune shading. I used to do tune style shading and then put an occlusion pass with it, and it looked like stop-mo,
Okay.
which was really interesting. You can do real-time, like you can do reflections with the 2D stuff and the like realism. You just have a lot of control in it that gives you some really unique looks and feels that you just can't. It's a little more challenging to get within the standard interface. So it's something I recommend playing with. And like that graphite, oops. Like you could actually create this in Final Tune and actually render it out. Why they would put this as a viewport option in here and not have it really be useful, I'm sure there's a reason. I just don't know what it is. I haven't found it yet. But if any of you find the reason, by all means, let me know. Maybe you discover something that I'm not aware of. Okay, so for the most part, we're gonna leave this shading to default. We can also, in this area, configure our viewport background, but that's all stuff you guys don't really necessarily need to toy with. Okay? All right. Should we create stuff? Yeah. All right, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at polyprimitives. Everything that you model begins from a simple shape. From characters to cars to environments, it doesn't matter. It all starts out as a cube. It starts as a plane. It starts as a sphere, whatever. So here's how we do this. Over in our channel box, we're going to click on the plus tab. It's the furthest left option. This is going to go into our create menu for us. And we want to make sure that within this create menu, see how we have these icons? You guys all see this series of icons that we can kind of click on, and depending upon what we click on, it gives us a variety of different options. For us, we're going to start in this very first sphere option. Yeah.
Why is teapot considered a primitive?
Oh man, teapot has a long history in CG. It's like the first, I don't know, how would I sort of quantify that? It's sort of, if you could accomplish teapot in the very beginning, it was like you were off to the races, right? And so it's just kind of stuck. It used to be a standard primitive in everything, and programmatically, that was like the first thing they would have us program, was programming a teapot. I don't know why, but it's been around from the beginning, and so it's here to stay, I guess. It's here to stay, yeah. All right, we're going to want to make sure that our drop-down menu is set to standard primitives, and by default, it already should be for you guys. So what I'm going to do, let's start with a cube or a box. So I'm going to click on box. Now, when I create something in my scene in 3ds Max, I have two ways of doing this. The first way, not my preferred method, but a method that you can use, is we can click. I'm just left mouse clicking and drawing in my scene, releasing my mouse, pulling up, and clicking on my mouse again. So I can draw this stuff in my scene. Now, I personally do not like doing it this way because it doesn't give us a whole lot of control right out of the gate. I like to start with really fresh pieces of geometry sitting right in my origin. And I can see right now, if I click on this, and if I need to get out of that tool, right mouse click anywhere in your viewport, and it'll remove you from creating stuff. Okay. If I click on this and I hit W on my keyboard, W does what? Yeah, W, E, and R, exactly the same in Max as it is in Unity. So you guys already are, like, half the battle is already won because you guys already know many of the hotkeys that we're dealing with in here because you've been dealing with them for the last couple weeks. So one thing to note, if I click in this and I hit my W key, everybody look up here for a sec. See down here on my channel box where my numbers are? That's telling me where this is sitting in space. If I move that, if I grab those arrows and click and drag, it's going to move my location. I can come in and I can type numbers, or I can reset them. An easy way to reset numbers in Max. If you hover your mouse over the two little arrows next to the box and you hit your right mouse button, it's going to reset the value to 0. So let's say I've got this all whatever, and I want to set this back to the origin quickly. Rather than typing in numbers, if I hover my mouse and I right mouse click over each of these options, it sets it back to 0. Okay. Now, creating it this way, like I said, I don't like. It's too much work out of the gate. So I'm going to delete that. If I want to delete a piece of geometry, I'm simply going to click on it, hit delete on my keyboard. Here's a better way of doing it, which also allows us a little bit more upfront control. If I click on my box, down here in my stack, under creation method, I've got two options. I've got cube and I've got box. I'm going to change this to cube because I want it to be uniform in size. The next thing I'm going to do is my keyboard entry. I'm going to click on that so that I get the drop-down menu associated with it. And now I've got things that I can go in and I can dictate. I want this thing to sit at the origin when I create it. So for X, Y, and Z, I'm going to set this to 0, 0, 0. For my size, you can dictate whatever size you want. Because it's a cube, I'm going to set it to 10 by 10 by 10. But you could do 5 by 5, you can do 15 by 15, I don't care. You can always scale it after the fact. It's just going to give us something to start with. Okay. So, here's the thing that I want you to do is hit create, but don't click on anything once you do it. Once I hit it's now created my sphere or my box or my cube right in my origin. It's given me a nice clean piece of geometry. And now before I click on anything out here, there's some things that I may want to make changes to. Let's say, for example, I want to add more edges than I'm actually seeing. So down here under the parameters, I've got some attributes that I can change for this particular piece of geometry just right out of the gate, just to give me some baseline stuff to start with. So as I add features to this, now one thing you're going to notice, as I'm adjusting these numbers, I should be seeing more edges. Here's why I'm not. I need to turn on my edges option. So here are two more hotkeys for you guys to know. Hit F4 on your keyboard. That will show you the edges. And right now, this would be considered way high poly than I would want to deal with right out of the gate. So I'm going to reset this back down, but I want you to be aware that this is one way that you guys can go at it. Go in and you can add subdivisions to this thing as you start. Now, once I have the edges in there that I want, if I click outside of or I click back in my viewport, you're going to notice I can't get back to those options. Not through this channel anyway. Okay. So let's just look at our viewing hotkeys real quick. So with your cube selected, or actually, how about this? Click off your cube. Click somewhere in your viewport. Hit F3 on your keyboard. That's going to show us our wireframe view. This is really handy when we're trying to grab things, grab vertices and things on the back side of our geometry. Okay. Hit F3 again. That brings us back to shaded mode. Hit F4. You're going to see if you hit F4 off and on, that is going to allow us to see our edges on our shaded view. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if once we click off of the box, we can't go in and add more edges.
Not this way.
Okay.
Can we? Yes, absolutely, and we will. But where this becomes useful, and we'll definitely see it when we do the table next week, is as we add subdivisions this way, it provides equal distance between the edges.
Right.
And that's really, can be really useful for us out of the gate. But can we go in after the fact and add edges? Yes. And can we create equal distance using other methods? Yes. And we will. So, but it's just nice to have some variation. And you're going to notice that with some of the other primitives that we're dealing with, we don't have to stick with the shape of that primitive right out of the gate. If we change the subdivisions, it's going to completely alter the shape of that thing. And we're going to see that in a second. All right. So once we have this created, what we do still have available to us is a naming convention and a color. This color is just kind of dictating what our baseline or default shading is going to be before we add a material to this thing. The other thing that it's going to do is that we can actually color code geometry. Even after we have materials associated with them, our lines will remain that particular color. So let's say, for example, I've got my craft, right? We're gonna create the components of our mothership from our scene from last week. We'll do that today. Let's say I wanted all the legs to always have red lines. So I know that if I select on that, they're landing legs. I can change the color by simply double clicking on this, pulling up the object color dialog and changing whatever color I want that to be. Okay. I can also type in a name here. All right. Okay. Now, if I go in after the fact and I want to adjust sizing, I want to rotate it, I can do all that stuff. Just like if we had created this very basic piece of primitive geometry in Unity, it's the same idea. Okay. Okay. One thing you guys might notice, some useful hotkeys, is that some of you might by default have this bounding box on. It's the sort of outlined edges deal. You guys see this? Look at where my mouse is at if you're not sure what I'm talking about. This thing, these. When I was working in Max initially, those used to drive me crazy. They're not particularly, I don't find them useful. So the hotkey to turn those off is J. What's that? Yeah, turns them back on too. So if you need those for any reason, it's just giving you kind of a bounding box, but I don't know. I got nothing. Tim, I got nothing on that. That's why I turned them off, because I didn't find a use for it. Well. Okay. Okay, so we've got our first piece of geometry. Let's go in, and before we start messing with just messing with things in general, let's see what other shapes we can create. So let's start with a sphere. We can go to our keyboard entry. Let's say we give it a radius of 5. We're going to hit create. And let's toy with the number of segments. And you guys can see as I start to adjust the segments, see how I'm completely altering the shape of this thing? Okay. The other thing that's cool about this is, let's say I only want, let's see, I only want a partial sphere. I can go in and I can adjust the hemisphere and get just a little partial sphere. Now it will create a cap for me at the bottom. All that means is rather than having a giant hole here, it's filling it in for us. Okay. If I choose the chop option, it's kind of very similar actually. Okay, I can adjust my radius here. Okay. So really each one of these, I'm just going to kind of go through, each one of these provides us initial features that we can go in and toy with to dictate what type of shape we start with when we're modeling. And what we choose to start with is really kind of dependent upon on what we're modeling. I can tell you most things start from a cube. When in doubt, start with a cube. Right? The reason for that is when you smooth something down that's a cube, unless you've gone in and you've added some edges in particular locations, it's going to always smooth out. Character models often start with a cube, which is weird to think. You'd have a character that would begin from nothing more than a box, but it's the case. If we go in and toy with some of these, we can see what sort of shapes we get, or sort of geometric, nuts and bolts style. Now, since we're looking at this, this is a good opportunity to come back to our quads and tries thing that we were talking about, or that I threw up on the board earlier. When we model in Max or Maya, our goal is to keep our polygons as either quads or tries. What do you think I mean by that? Any ideas? Those who have not had my class before? Yeah.
To make the polygons on there, how we have squares.
Yeah.
Versus squares versus triangles.
Yeah. So, in other words, how many vertices make up that poly face? If you're in doubt, count the vertices that are attached to it. So this particular poly face has 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a quad. Does that make sense so far? If, for example, we had a line that went from this point to this point, I would have 2 tries. 1, 2, 3 to make up that triangle and to make up this triangle. Does that make sense so far? Okay.
But what about the top face that has many?
And that's exactly why I'm bringing this up, because that's bad and we need to fix it.
Okay.
Yes. And by default, if we see default geometry created like this, this is where our cap segment is important. If we give this a cap, it fixes the problem for us. We want that. We want to have caps for our geometry because now we have quads and tries. Okay. If I pull the cap away, I now have a giant what's called n-gon, meaning I have a poly face with more than 4 points attached to it. This becomes problematic for us in texturing. It becomes problematic for us in animating. It becomes problematic for really a variety of reasons. And where this is important for us to keep in mind is that eventually we're going to work in quads, but eventually we're going to import our stuff into Unity as tries, and the game package, either we can manually convert it or the game package will convert it. It's just a lot easier for the engine to read it that way. Although I've noticed more and more people using quads within the game engines, and I think, like I said, it kind of goes back to that concept that we were talking about earlier about as technology is progressing, some of these restrictions are becoming less and less of an issue. But generally speaking, we don't want to have poly faces with more than 4 vertices associated with it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why is changing the cap segment to 2 still allow 4?
So what it's looking at, you're looking at this number and you're unclear as to why. Okay. So what this number is referring to is how many circular cuts there are. We have the main one out here is the main cap, and then we have another circular cut here. And because of that, we're converting our poly faces. This number has nothing to do with poly faces at all. It's the number of cuts we're making. Yeah. Nothing to do with quads and tries. It's simply cuts. Don't overthink it. You're really, really overthinking it right now.
Tapping on just one side of the geometry like that?
No, it's both sides.
Yeah, if you wanted to just get one, you'd have to manually sell it.
Yeah, you can't. What you would have to do is, well, you wouldn't want just one.
Ever.
Yeah, ever. Because you're still doing, you don't want n-gons anywhere on your model, whether we're seeing them or not seeing them. Occasionally will it happen Yes, if you have to have one, hide it. Right? But generally speaking, you don't want them anywhere. Yeah. So when you guys create primitive geometry like cylinders and this sort of thing, you want to make sure to add a cap is what I'm telling you. That's the point. Because we don't want to have a giant n-gon sitting on the top and the bottom of this piece of geometry. So cap it.
Is there ever a situation where it gets challenging to stay within this?
Yes. Yeah. Brendan, does it get challenging?
That's all I do all day.
Yeah. I used to kind of equate it to those OMSI puzzles. You know, you go down the hall. You guys been to OMSI lately or within the last few years? And there's a hallway of like sort of these brain games. It's kind of like that. Sometimes it's just like, no matter what you do, you have an n-gon somewhere, or you have this point somewhere that just, you have to get it to go away, but you have to figure out how things flow from one point to the next in order to do it. And it can be a challenge, particularly with characters. Dealing with points at like places that naturally move, like faces and shoulders, elbows. If you have points in those locations, and what happens is as the character moves, those points kind of stick out and they look like little nubbins, right? So you don't want that, but
Part of the challenge.
yeah, it is part of the challenge. So when we're modeling in here, we're going to be modeling in quads. We're going to let the conversion process to tries happen for us at a later time, but we're going to model in quads. So when you guys are modeling stuff and you're adding cuts and you're merging vertices and doing all that stuff that we're going to get to, you have to keep in mind what those poly faces are doing, right? And you're going to notice for every piece of geometry that we create, see how everything is quads? And then at the top we get to tries? All right, everything we do in here for the most part is going to be something like that. It's very rarely going to give you something out of the gate that's n-gon style. And if it is giving you that, I would recommend not starting with that piece of geometry.
Like,
What's that? No, even teapot. Teapot's all quads. It's all quads. Tries there, but otherwise it's all quads.
and it's not a problem if there are some tries.
No, you will. Inevitably, you have to. If you've got circular pieces like this, they have to come to a point somehow. And there's no way to get around that. So quads and tries are fine. It's when you start getting into 5-sided, 6-sided, 7-sided polyfaces that become problematic.
Is that because of rendering?
Yes. Rendering, it's how the textures lay on the surface, how things animate and bend. Yeah, it'll cause you issues. Yeah. And so those issues might not become apparent until you're forced to deal with them, honestly. And most of you, I imagine, at some point will get to that where it's like, oh, that's what she meant. So just for now, take my word for it. Okay. Okay. So each one of these we can go through. Taurus is a fun one. I suppose I ought to give it some kind of. Okay. All right. So let's adjust these so they're not so weird. It's like a giant donut. Okay. Now what's fun about this with the segments, I mean, you guys can really toy with what the initial shape is out of the gate. To really start with something entirely different than a donut.
Basically something with a hole in it.
Wow.
What's that?
Something with a hole in the middle.
Yeah, basically something with a hole in the middle. Yeah, that's what it kind of comes down to. Yeah. Now, what's fun about this is most things that have values like this, you can animate. So, like on this twist value, I could rotate. I could animate my twist value. I could animate my rotation value and do some interesting things. So, when you guys are going through your first assignment where you have to create a vehicle, you're going to have to go in and create a vehicle out of primitive shapes. This is an opportunity for you to go in and see what each of these are kind of about and see how you can adjust them. We'll also go into some of our cutting tools so that you can manipulate them after the fact, but we do have an option for extended primitives. Let's see what oil tank is. I'm kind of curious. Just draw this one. Oh, okay. Yeah, that can be kind of fun. Oil tank sounds so much more glamorous than what this provided me, but that's okay. What's that? Yeah, it does, right? Pharmaceutical is what it needs to be called. Let's see what. Oh, that's kind of fun. Okay, I like that one. That's trippy. Huh. Yeah, so you guys. Oh, yeah, there we go. That's fun. So, when you guys create your vehicle for your first assignment, you have the option to go into your standard primitives, and then you can go into your extended primitives. We won't go through all of them. Mostly it's just experimentation on your part to see what each of these shapes kind of give you and to see what it is that you would want to start with given your particular task at hand. Okay. Spindle, what's a spindle? Oh yeah, okay. So that's kind of cool too, a little topper. So lots of fun things to toy with. Okay, so next thing, right now, if I come in and I create a cube, I really can't do anything with this yet. I have to convert this into an editable mesh or an editable poly in order to access its components. Okay? So remember when I say accessing components, what I mean by is accessing the faces and the edges and the vertices in order to do something with it. Right now I can't do that. So as soon as you create a piece of geometry, what we have to do is convert it to something editable. So hover your mouse over the piece of geometry, hold down your right mouse button. Down at the bottom of that menu that pops up, we've got an option called Convert To. You guys are going to choose Convert To Editable Poly. And as soon as I do that, you're going to see that my modifier stack over here changes, and it is going to bring up a bunch of options available to me specific to editing that piece of geometry. Okay. So let's talk about how do we get to our components. There are a couple different ways that we can do this. First way, the way that I use the most because of just speed, if you hover your right mouse over or hover your mouse over your object and hold down your right mouse button, it's going to pull up that sub menu again, and right above the center of that menu, I've got top level, vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element. You guys all see that? Let's start with vertex. Go ahead and select it and release your mouse. You're going to see that I now have access to the vertices of my geometry. So, select one of those vertices and move it using your W key. Everybody good with that? What I can tell you is modeling, all modeling is, and I'm not kidding, is pushing around points. That's what modeling is. Okay? Hold down Shift, which is good. Good question. I was just getting to that. So, select one. If you want to select multiple vertices, hold down your Shift button and select the ones that you want. Now, I'm going to give myself geometry with a little bit more meat to it here. If you right mouse click and you choose Convert To, you got an option for Convert to Editable Poly. So this right menu is going to allow us to access our verts. And I'm just holding down Shift to select multiple vertices. I can rotate them. I can move them. I can scale them to dictate or change the shape of my piece of geometry. Okay. How about we try edges? So I'm going to hold down my right mouse button and I'm going to choose edge. This is going to allow me to go in and select individual edges. Okay. Now, if I were to double click on one of those edges, what it's going to do is it's going to select the loop or edge loop associated with it. Now, for things like spheres, for example, if you're clicking vertically rather than horizontally, it's going to probably stop at the cap because it's not going to know what direction to go on the back side of the sphere. So you just need to use your Shift key to select the back side. If you hold down Shift and double click on the corresponding side, it should pick it up. So I'll move my cube out of the way here. I'll have a sphere in here just as well. Okay. So if I wanted to select this edge loop and, oops, this way, I can double mouse click and see how it stops at the cap. It's because it gets to the top, it doesn't know where to go. So if I hold down my Shift key and I double click on the other side, it should pick up the other cap. Okay. Well, maybe I have to do that manually. Yeah, usually it grabs it for me. That's okay. There's going to be other ways that we're going to grab edge loops, but I just wanted to show you, you can double click on edges and it'll select groupings of. Shift will also select groupings of.
Go way in on the top of it and double click.
What's that?
Corners of the top and do it. Do like go way in.
Shouldn't matter. It's weird though. Huh. It's doing it for me last night. I wonder what's going on with that. Okay. It's all right. We're gonna talk about selecting edge loops here in a minute. Okay. Let's go into our polygon. So hover over your geometry, hover over your mouse and right mouse click and choose polygon. That's going to allow us to click on the individual faces. Okay. Just like with the vertices and the edges, we can push and pull those around, we can scale them, we can rotate them, we can do whatever we want. Okay. So that's one way to get to those three items. The other way is over here in our modifier stack. See how we have this editable poly drop down? If I click on the arrow, it's going to allow me to click on vertex, polygon, edge, just like I did before. So this is another way to get to that. Alternatively, down here in the selection, we also have the options to click on them using the icons. So remember me saying 100 different ways to do the same darn thing in these programs? This is a perfect example of that. Are any of these wrong? No.
I wonder if we could cut the interface in half.
I know, right? Make it a little...
The interface is so overwhelming.
Oh my gosh, I know. Make it less robust and save us some money. It'd be great. But yeah. Well, it is not. There are moments where you're having to troubleshoot, and if you have alternative methods of doing something, it is useful. But for things like this, it's kind of like, why? I mean, this is right there. I don't understand. But hey, you know, I guess more options is better than limited ones, I guess. All right, the edges, all of this is going to refer to our outer edges, usually dealing with things that are like holes. So for example, if I were to grab one of my poly faces here and hit delete, and then I click, usually on my borders, see what it's going to do is it's going to click or select the border that doesn't have a poly face on the interior side of it. So it's kind of a lot, it's selecting a lot like what it's sounding like it's selecting. Okay. Element we'll come back to. This is something that we're going to start tapping into when we attach objects to each other. So we're not going to mess with element for the moment. Now, if you are in your vertex edge face mode and you need to get back to an object mode, you're going to choose the top level. So if in the right mouse menu, top level gets you back to the base. Over here, you just click on editable poly. You just go up to the top of this stack, and it'll get you out of those component modes. Okay. Question? No? All right. Cool. All right. Are there any questions so far with this? So I'm not joking when I say that really modeling is going in and moving the stuff around to the shape that you want. A lot of it really is. I mean, we're going to add cut tools and things so that we can push things in and make more edges and that sort of deal. But really, at the very, very base of it, you're taking these three things and you're moving them around to get the shape that you want, a lot like clay. That's it. It's cool, right? All right. So, let's make sure, I'm making sure I'm not bypassing anything. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about our selection options real quick before we get too far along. So you're going to find that since modeling is pushing and pulling vertices around, there's going to be times we're going to want to make some intricate selections. Right now I'm just dealing with a cube, so it's not taking me a whole lot to select things. Let's say I wanted to select this vert loop. Okay. Probably the easiest way to select something like that is go into an orthographic view. Oops. If I click and drag and marquee select, that is a whole heck of a lot easier than me trying to spin around it in the perspective view and select it. Know what I mean? So use your perspective views. I'll move this over so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Right? Now I can move that edge around. Rather than me trying to do this in my perspective view where I'm like, click, 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 click. Right? It's just time consuming. You don't need to do that. And if I tried to select marquee selected in my perspective view, it's taking the perspective into account. And now I've selected these things down on the bottom that I didn't really want to select. So the orthographic views are really nice for that type of selecting, particularly if you're using a square marquee. Now, can we change the type of selection tool that we're using? Yeah, absolutely. So up here in our toolbox, see this little marquee box? If we hold that button down, it's going to allow us to change the type of selection option we have available to us. So let's say I want to do the circular selection. It's going to allow me to kind of click and drag based off of, I personally don't, so occasionally it's useful, but for general purposes, I don't find that quite as helpful to me as some of the others, but it's there. This one is really nice. It's basically a lasso tool, very similar to Photoshop. So it'll allow me to come in my perspective view and really capture the things that I want to capture. Because I can just click and kind of paint my selection in. I also have an angular sort of lasso tool. Also, same style as Photoshop. Same idea. Yeah.
It looks like it's pretty important for us to specify which thing we're trying to capture, vertex, edge, when we're doing that kind of selection. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you want to
switch back to editable poly and try that. And it's like, oh, now everything's selected.
Yeah, you have to be in a particular mode. Yeah, I mean, because if you're in the top of the level, it's looking at this as your selection. It would be, rather than rather than selecting components on this particular piece of geometry, if I'm in something like this, it's looking at geometry specific. Versus, let's say I had, 800 spheres in here, and I wanted to avoid capturing that. Yeah, it absolutely is dependent upon what it is you're trying to select. So if you're trying to select edges, be in edge mode. If you're trying to select vertices, be in vert mode. If you want to select objects on an object basis, then be at the top level. So yes, that does matter. But, dictating how your marquee selection or how your selection tool is working just makes your life a little easier when you're trying to really make intricate stuff, especially on things like spheres, or just rounded objects, complex objects, and you're trying to really get right up into a particular location and change things around. Sometimes if you're just using the square marquee, it can get a little challenging. Not that you couldn't do it, but, it's all about really, for us, at the end of the day, we're learning the foundational stuff now, but if you were in industry, it comes down to speed. How quickly can you do this stuff? And if you can find little things like this to help you go just that much faster, you got to use it. So yeah. The other thing that's kind of interesting, I don't toy with this myself a whole lot, but it's kind of can be a nice tool. Right to the right of those selection options, we can dictate whether or not our selection happens as we move our cursor over the center of the object. So like right now, see how I have my marquee selection and I've got the box kind of sitting halfway out of it in the icon? What that means is as my marquee selection touches that geometry in any way, it's going to select it. If I move this or I change this to the middle, I have to get past the middle of that piece of geometry in order for it to select. Where that becomes useful is if we have different pieces of geometry kind of stacked on top of each other or interacting in certain ways and we want to make sure that we're only getting exactly what we want. That's one way to kind of filter it, if you will. All right. Okay. Other things that are nice, we have the ability to isolate a particular piece of geometry that we want to work on. So let's say I've got, I'm just going to add a couple of duplicates in here of things. Say I've got a whole scene of spheres and cubes, and I really just want to work on this cube because my spheres are getting in my way. So what I can do is if I right mouse click over my object and I choose isolate selection, it's going to hide everything else for me and allow me to just focus on this one thing. So I'm holding down my right mouse button. I'm choosing isolate selection. Or if I want to bring them back, I'm going to choose unhide. I can unhide by name. I can unhide all of them at the same time. All right, so I've got some fun options there that allow me to really get sort of down and dirty with the one thing that I really want to focus on. And having that isolate selection is a nice little tool. Is this something that's going to, a do or die kind of thing for you to remember right now? No, but I do want to show you that it's possible. Because there are going to be moments where it comes up and it's like, oh man, that's way easier to deal with. So, okay. As far as our edge loops that we were talking about, we've got some fun things that we can toy with in the modifier stack. So let's go with edge. Over here in our selection section, it's one of those things I really love about Max. Let's say I grab this edge loop. If I click on loop, it's going to grab the loop for me. If I click, let's say, vertically, oops, it's going to choose the ring, but not the way I was hoping for it to do. But it'll choose that ring. I can choose all of the loops in those directions. And what's cool is as I move the arrows up and down, it kind of dictates where the selection point is, sort of the areas of influence. And I can use the shrink and grow options to shrink or grow my selection. So let's say, for example, I click on this polyface and I choose, all right, I want to grow that selection out by one layer. One more layer. One more layer. We want to shrink it back down. So it allows some really nice selection features that can be useful when you're trying to make quick adjustments. Like I said, could you come in here and hold down your shift key and grab what you want? Yeah, any day, but it just comes down to speed. Okay. So just giving you some ideas on the selection options because it'll help you move along at a little quicker pace. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about our Scene Explorer over here. This is the area within Max, similar to the outliner in Maya, where we're going to keep our scene organized. And we want to be really diligent about keeping our scene organized for the same reason that we want to be diligent about keeping our file structure organized. Because you won't be typically, anyway, you won't typically be the only one working in your scene file. Someone should be able to jump into your file and be able to figure things out really fast. And if you have a laundry list of 100 items over here called Sphere 2000, you're not going to make friends with that. You know, help your coworkers out, and really it's useful for you. It's going to help speed up your workflow. So this area is going to allow us to name objects. We can also turn the visibility off and on for certain objects. So rather than going into the isolate selection, we can just click on certain objects and turn eyeballs off and on. This is exactly like Photoshop, which is really nice. I can also shift select items and do the off and on. I can hold down my control key so I can select particular items, not necessarily in order. Okay. As I click on an item, you're going to also notice it's allowing me to select that item within my viewport. So where that becomes handy is if I have objects that are, let's say, interacting with each other, and Max is having a hard time knowing what one I want to select in my viewport. An alternative method of selecting something would be to come in and just click on it in my Scene Explorer. The other nice thing about this that I personally really like is the freeze option. If I click on this little snowflake, it's going to freeze that piece of geometry for me so I can't accidentally move it around or do things to it. So if let's say I want to see it in here, but I don't want to edit it by accident, I can freeze it and I won't be able to do anything to it. Also very similar to Photoshop. What's that?
Apparently I missed that part.
What's that?
Being able to freeze something and therefore not.
Yeah, I should click on, all you do is click on the snowflake. Yeah. Now, yeah, why is snowflake? I have no idea. They're just tripping us up. Like if you're jumping in, well, I guess they do have the label above it, but oh, frozen. That's why. No, oh my god. Yeah, you guys don't want to hear my singing voice. It's like cats. Alright. Here's the one thing with the freezing part that used to drive me crazy, and it took me a little while to figure it out when I was first working in Max. When you freeze something, it turns it to gray. That used to drive me crazy. If I had materials on things and I kind of wanted to see how things were actually interacting, we can turn that off. If you right mouse click over your object and you go into object properties, it should pull up our dialog box for us. Why aren't you? There we go. Okay. This object properties dialog box is really, really helpful. It's a really nice tool for gaining information about your geometry and also doing things that are kind of geometry specific. So it's very similar for those of you who have experience in Maya. It's kind of like going into your render stats in your objects. Okay. Actually, it's, yeah, a lot like it, only with better and more really associated with it. It's going to give us information about the dimensions, the vertice count, the face count. materials that are applied to it, if we have it on a particular layer, if it's, you know, attached to something else, we can get information or tell it, hey, I want this thing in my scene, but I don't want it to render. I can turn it off the visibility to the camera, so I can kind of make it like a dummy object. I can tell it to be renderable or cast or receive shadow. So there's just a lot of stuff in here. But what we're most concerned about for the moment, as related to the things we're talking about, is this show frozen in gray. If I check that off, now when I freeze something or freeze that object, it's not going to turn gray on me. So again, it's, do you have to do that? No. It's a choice depending upon what it is that you're trying to do. But sometimes I suppose the gray can be nice just to give you a really quick visual in terms of what might be frozen. It's up to you. Okay. But I remember that driving me crazy. So it's just worth mentioning. Okay. If I click, kind of softly click on my text over here in my Scene Explorer, it'll allow me to change the naming conventions. So I could say my Sphere 01. Alternatively, I could come over to the modifier stack and change the name here. Doesn't really matter. Both do the same thing. What's also nice is I have the ability on this left-hand panel to kind of filter out what I'm seeing in my scene. So if I don't really want to see the cameras, I can turn them off. If I only want to see geometry, I can, or I don't want to see geometry and I've got lights and things I'm dealing with, all right, I can turn geometry off. So it just allows us to kind of filter through and dictate what we see and what we don't see in our scene. Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about grouping and parenting. So I'm just kind of moving these around and make it a little more visually relatable to what we're talking about. All right. One of the other things that we can do in our Explorer over here is we can start to group objects. Grouping objects is really, really useful for us, particularly if you're trying to A, keep your Scene Explorer organized, and B, it can also be useful for us in terms of an animation tool. So the best example that I can give is let's take, can you guys all see this door back here? Kind of? I get it, probably can't. Maybe we'll take this one. Let's take this door, for example. So we're going to model this. There's a couple things that we're going to look at with regard to whether we choose to model it as a single piece or as multiple pieces kind of put together. So things that I would consider when I'm making those decisions. Very first thing. Losing my pen already. Where is it? Okay. Texturing. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a moving target for us because we're eventually going to be moving into kind of more game style texturing, and it's got its own sort of can of worms associated with this. But we'll start with this sort of principle. With this door, what I'm going to look at, let's say I'm looking at the lock down here at the bottom, then I'm looking at the handle here, and then I'm looking at the main part of the door, maybe the glass. What I see at this is I see the glass being a texture. This, although it's very similar to the rest of the door, maybe let's say it's a little different. Let's say it's more of a matte texture and this has more of a gloss to it. So these would be textured different. And then I've got this silver part, I've got the metal. Okay. Well, if I consider just the texturing by itself, the things I would have to ask myself is, would it be easier for me just to apply those colors to those individual pieces rather than trying to lay it out as a single unit and paint those textures in? Now, for games, we're going to try to get everything as, well, single models as we can. But just on that alone, what this is telling me is I've got 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece, 4 piece. Okay? So that's the first idea. The second would be animation. If I want my door to swing out this way, right? I would like to do what's called grouping. I want to take these 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and I want to put them in a group. And what I would do is animate the full group moving out this way. Now, the usefulness in grouping something is I still have access to the individual pieces. I can still go in and I can still move, let's say, this handle separately from the group. And I can move this lock separately from the group. Right? Now, where this becomes useful, particularly for the lock, although I wish I had really seen kind of a door with a door handle, maybe the bathroom, you guys look at the bathroom, for example. If I wanted to animate, let's say, the door handle, say I have a door handle that moves traditionally, rotates. If I wanted the door handle to swing down and then the full grouping of the door to swing out this way, what I would need to do is animate the door handle rotating and then animate the group swinging out. If that wasn't the case, if this was all 1 piece, could I do that? No, because as soon as the door handle moves this way, my full door rotates with it. Right? So grouping allows us to go in and not only organize our scene, but also make animations like that. So here's how you group in 3ds
Would it
Max.
also be, Nikki, like when you have like a door, for example, that blows up, it's just a whole bunch of little pieces? Or is that a whole different thing?
That's a whole can of worms. Yeah, no. I'm gonna say gray area maybe. There's not an easy answer to that one. Specifically with things blowing up.
The door blows up, it probably wouldn't blow up the way that it's assembled, because those pieces would break.
Okay,
Yeah, you'd add some dynamics to that.
You might blow up, you might make a bunch of pieces, or
Well, it's more like an effect.
Yeah. I get where you're going with that. You just chose an example that was a little more complicated. So yes and no, clear as mud, right? But yeah, kind of, you're on the right pathway with that. Yeah. So let's say car, like your car you guys are going to do today. Let's say you choose to do, something real simple, sort of a box car with wheels that spin. Well, if you want your car to move while the wheels are spinning like this, you have to have a group so that your car can move, the whole unit can move, but your wheels can spin independently. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So the wheels are still grouped because otherwise they wouldn't go together.
Yeah, you could group them. Yeah, so you can have subgroups too, right? So if I was going to create a grouping of my car, like let's say I've got this really basic, I have a box car, right? So I've got here, got wheel here, wheels on the back side. It's beautiful, right? Okay, so I could have my car main piece of geometry, and then I've got wheel 01 all the way down to 04. So what I can do is I can group my wheels as a wheel group, and then have another main group that is my vehicle. My vehicle would move around while my wheels spin. Okay? It'll make more sense when you guys do it. So we've got texturing, we got animation, and then the other thing that we would maybe consider, and this is a little more ambiguous for you guys right now, it's going to take a little bit of time to wrap your brain around. It'll make more sense next week when we do your table and chairs. I like to call it sculptability. So it's just your ability to actually go in and add the details that you want and have them behave the way you want on a single piece of geometry. Sometimes you kind of need to get the look that you want. So just table that one in the back of your brain for now. But the other two I want you to have kind of make sense right now. Do those two make sense? The texturing and the animating? Yeah. Good. Okay. So additionally, it allows us to organize the Scene Explorer, which is kind of the bigger thing at the moment. So let's say I have these two spheres and I want to put them in a group. If I shift select them, and I hit Control G on my keyboard, that's going to pull up the grouping option. I'm going to call this spheres, and I'm going to hit OK. I now have basically a sub, or I've got a group in my Scene Explorer, and if I click on the arrow, I can now see my individual pieces. So let's say I had 100 spheres in here. Would I want to see a list of 100 spheres in my Scene Explorer? No. I would want to group them into a sphere group so that I can clean this up. A lot like Photoshop, if you're creating folders in Photoshop, this concept is exactly the same. Okay? Now, for those of you who are Maya users, the one thing that you're going to find with this that's different than in Max is that you can't just click on the individual pieces and access them. What you have to do is you have to open the group and access it that way. So, to do that, up in the menu, you're going to notice a group menu. We could have also grouped it this way. You're going to notice I just used the hotkey for this, but we could have come up here and chosen to group it this way. If I want to access those individual pieces and do stuff with them, I have to choose open. It's going to show me that that group is open, and now I can go in and I can access them and do whatever I want. When I'm done with that, close the group.
So you can't just go and select the spheres in your...
No, that's the one thing about grouping in Max that I actually don't particularly like, that you can do in Maya. Usually in Maya you can access the individual parts.
Let's say you're creating a group, can you drag a new piece of geometry into a group?
Let's see, no,
How would you add it?
that is, let's see. There we go. Oh, wait, no. Where is my assembly? Should be able to. I used to be able to do that with Max. I'll look that up and let you know. I know it's a simple thing, but it's been a little while since I've done this specifically in Max. And it has to do with opening it back up and... Oh, wait. No.
What happens when you click on the group on the side and not inspect it?
What's that?
You click on the group, what do you see over to the right?
You mean in your modifier stuff?
Yeah,
In
when
this
you
area?
click on that group, can you add anything?
Oh, no, no, no. No, it's going to be over here, and I know it's here. Hold on. Pause for 1 second. We'll find out. Well, I don't like that. It doesn't give me the best. Oh yeah, it should be that. Why is it not doing it? Maybe my group needs to be closed. Maybe that's what it is. Well. Yeah, Dylan, I'll get back to you on it. I know you can do it. It's just been a little while since I've done it in Mac specifically. And then we should be able to just drag it over, and it seems to not want to. Seems to not want to go. Come on, you stinker. Alright. I'll let you know before class ends. Yeah. That's the tough part about going back and forth to 3ds Max and Maya as frequently. It's like, sometimes I forget, like I get so used to one method that I forget what the other option is. So, but I know you can do it. So we'll come back. We'll come back to it. All right. For now, what I want you to get out of that is that we can create these subgroups, or we can create these groups. We can also create subgroups. So let's say I wanted to, do a subgroup of spheres, Sphere 02 or Sphere 01, whatever. I've now created a group within a group. If at any point I want to ungroup, I can choose group, ungroup, and it'll remove the one that you have selected. If worse comes to worse, Dylan, one of the things you can do on the fly for the moment is ungroup it, select what you want to group, and regroup it. Not. No, that can't be the method. That would cause you some annoyances down the road. So, yeah. Brendan, do you remember by chance having a no?
I was just finding that I didn't get
Yeah, that's gonna drive me crazy. Oh no, it's a really good question, and it's one of those things that like I don't necessarily always think about right on the fly. So you should be able to just attach it to the group. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. Maybe. Oops. Oh. No.
It's not like they don't have something either. It's like you can drag them.
Okay, no, it's not letting me do it that way either. All right, well, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Okay, so TB, remind me before class ends to look that up, and we'll figure it out. All right, so let's ungroup that. All right, as an alternative to grouping, we also have the ability to parent objects, meaning we've got sort of a main object that is dictating what the rest of them do. So for example, if I would like to have my spheres move along with this cube everywhere it goes, I can parent it. I could group them all together. That would be one method, but parenting, what this will allow me to do is kind of make this sort of my main sort of controller, if you will. So to do that, that's what these chain links are up at the top. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to select the children of whatever you want to parent to. You're going to choose the link button. And if you click and drag from the selected objects to what you want to parent it to, those things are now parented. And you can see I now have a box group kind of created, but my box is really the one dictating what happens. So we've got a couple different options there. So when you guys go in and you create your vehicle, for example, you could have groupings of wheels, you could have groupings of windows, you could do whatever you want, and then maybe you parent it to the frame of the car. That would be one route you could take. It would be totally legitimate. Right? Bottom line, all of these options are meant to help you really animate, which we're not going to do a ton of, but for more importantly for you guys, organizing your scenes. That's what it comes down to. What'd you do?
So I clicked on the object that wasn't in the group, and then I hit attach with the edit quality dropper, and then I clicked on the active, I hit the objects, went to group, went to attach, and then clicked on the two group objects.
Okay, hold on.
Added it.
Let's get to where you are. So I'm gonna to unparent, you select everything and you grab the unparent option, which is the one next to the chain link. All right, so let's grab these guys. Let's group them.
So then you select box 001.
Yep.
Go to the group menu, drop down to the name that you click attach,
Yeah.
and then click on one of the two group numbers in the scene, and now they're in the scene.
Did I not? I swear to God, I did that.
I don't know. I tried the same thing too.
Oh, you know what? I didn't click on it in my scene. I clicked on it in the scene explorer. Okay. Aha. Nice.
So, like, so muted.
I know. You would think you'd just be able to drag. I would want to be able to drag and that's what I'm used to doing in Maya is dragging and dropping over here. So that's what I was doing. Okay. And Unity. Yep. So thank you. Solves problem number 1. All right. So adding and removing. Now the next question. Yeah, we'll just ungroup for now. Okay. All right. Are there any questions so far on some of this stuff? You're like, where do I start? It's just giving you some framework, but I want to start going into some of our cutting tools so that you guys have some things to toy with for your cars. rather than just pushing and pulling this stuff around, which is kind of boring. You can do it. What's that? Okay. Fair enough. Let's talk about what your assignment is first so you can start thinking about it while we're talking. All right. So what you guys are going to do, you guys are going to create an imaginary vehicle of your choosing. I don't care what it is. Be creative. Have fun with it. You're going to start with with Max's poly primitives. You can use your standard primitives. You can use your extended primitives. I don't care. But you got to play by the below rules. There's not tons of them, but there are some. First, you have to use at least 4 different poly primitives of some kind. Start with something, multiple objects. And the purpose of that is so that you guys are kind of toying with some of the options available to you so you know what's there. Right? All of them need to be converted to editable polys. And if you plan on using your cutting tools at all, you'll have to. So otherwise, you won't be able to do anything with them other than just squash and stretch and rotate, I guess. The vehicle must be symmetrical from left to right for the most part. I got a little wiggle room on that. If you have good reason to have it be asymmetrical, that's fine. It's just there to make it a little easier for you, but I'll let you guys toy with that. There needs to be some type of visible locomotion. So wheels, wings, skis, pontoon. I have to be able to tell how this thing would move. So it can't be so abstract, basically, is what I'm saying, that I don't know what you're giving me. All objects need to be named. So every time you create something, name it. Get in the habit of doing that now. Don't create bad habits for yourselves. Create groups where appropriate and parent things where appropriate. All right, so my suggestion is group things that are similar. Wheels, windows, that kind of stuff. Wings, if you have planes, whatever. Group that stuff and then maybe parent it to the main body of your vehicle. Okay. You need to have a project structure created. So get in the habit of doing that. Now you guys, we already did that. So you have your project structure. You just need to start creating stuff and saving it. You're going to save your scene into your scenes folder, and you're going to give me a nice rendered image. Now, that's the one part we haven't talked about yet. So how do I render something out once I have it created? It's very easy. Up here in your toolbar, see this little teapot with the, I don't know, what is that? A lightning bolt? If you click on that, it's going to give you a render. It's going to show you what your geometry looks like. This is an image. This is a rendered image. Okay. Now my recommendation would maybe be to come into your perspective, drop down and choose to show safe frames. That's going to show you what is going to show up in your render and what isn't. So basically, it's going to frame your composition for you, is what this is doing. Okay. So all you're going to do is move your camera to a nice position, showing off your vehicle. Don't give me things that are clear out here, right, or way off in the distance. I don't want renders like this. Like, frame things up nicely. Okay. Give me a nice frame so I can see what you did. When you render it, you're simply going to save this image to your project structure. So if I click on this Save button, it's going to drop things down into a folder. It's going to look at your project structure. Now, I don't want you guys putting this in your scene folder. I would like for you guys to put this in your render output. And I think on your notes, what did I put that as? Oh, okay. I'm going to change this. So please make a note of this, everybody, on your assignment. We're going to leave this folder for textures. What I'd like for you guys to do is put your rendered images in the render output folder. So give it a name, Gunsire and vehicle. Save it as a JPEG for me. Hit save. It's going to give you some quality settings just like Photoshop. Give me the best quality. I want to see pretty. Hit OK. And I should now have a JPEG in my project structure. Ooh. So nice. All right. So rendering things out is not the challenging part of this. You're quite literally just hitting the render button and then saving the image that gets generated. All right. We'll talk about render settings and all that stuff at a later date. Okay. So it says here what I'm looking at in terms of grading. The biggest component of this is just creativity and you guys exploring. All right. I want you to see what you can come up with. Are there any questions with this so far? And there's a little example here of kind of what I'm thinking. All of this is just very simple geometry smushed together. Cubes, spheres. Some things have moved around. So this is, you know, a cube with some cut, or not even any cuts, just vertices moved. So remember, pushing and pulling vertices, that's all it is. You guys can do a lot without even having any cutting tools. All right. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of our cutting tools. This is where fun happens. This is where the good stuff really happens because it gives you more control over just, you know, the standard stuff that we've got when we first generate a piece of geometry. So let's say, for example, I have a cube that's just like that. I don't really have any edges to this yet. So this is where we're going to start to use our ribbon. Our ribbon and kind of our modifier stack. Now, first thing I need to do before I can edit anything is do what? Excellent. Yes, I need to convert it to an editable poly. As soon as I do that, now I can go in and I can mess with stuff. So let's take a look at some of our ribbon options and talk about what they do. I'm going to be clicking on the modeling tab. Everything that we're going to do for in here right now is going to be housed in the modeling tab. All right, first menu we're going to look at, or submenu, is the edit submenu. Now, what's super cool about Max that I love is that if you hover over an option long enough, it's going to give you a pretty extensive description in terms of what it does. And in some of these, it actually even gives you little videos, which is really nice. First thing we're going to look at is the Swift Loop. This is a tool that I use a lot. Now, if I click on this, what it's going to do as I move my mouse over my piece of geometry, it's going to allow me to create an edge loop for that piece of geometry. You guys all see that? So why don't you try it? Why don't you click on the Swift Loop and hover your mouse over your geometry. Now, once you're ready to place that edge loop, you just click. Click and release. And then you can keep adding edges as you want to. Once you're ready to get out of the tool, you just right mouse click in your viewport and you're done with the tool. Now in doing that, we've now added vertices and edges in those locations that we can move around. What's that?
Would that also easily increase the number of polygons, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. As we add cuts, we increase poly count. You guys aren't going to really have to worry about that right now, but yeah. But yes, a good question. Now what's really nice about the Swift Loop is it takes your poly flow into account. So what do I mean by that? Well, as we start to create more complex shapes, let's say we're creating like an arm of some kind. Keep walking away from me. All right, are you guys good with this stuff? Can I erase it? Yeah. So let's talk, the best sort of framework I can put this around is characters. Let's say I have this arm, it's kind of being bent. And I've got edges that make up this arm. I got crease there, edge loop there, got an edge loop there, maybe I've got some edge loops here, edge loops here, that make up my shape. Okay? how these edges are organized or how sort of clean they are, it's called topology. Or you might also hear me refer to it as polyflow. And what's happening is depending upon where those edges are, that's what allows that arm to bend. If I don't have an edge here, edges here, this isn't going to bend anywhere. There's nothing to bend on, right? I want to maintain a nice clean polyflow as much as I possibly can. So for example, what I wouldn't want for this arm would be something where I've got like edge here, maybe I got an edge here, something like that. Then I've got this little guy kind of coming down, and it's going off in this way. This arm is not going to bend appropriately because everything is sort of cattywampus. The edges are all over the place. This would be bad. This would be good. You guys kind of see that? Billy's starting to understand a little bit. Okay. Now, why this is important is when we're working with our Swift loop, it takes the flow of geometry into account and tries to maintain nice clean flow for us. So it's not going to create edges in weird spots. It's going to actually look at the shape and apply that edge loop accordingly. So for example, let's, I'm going to throw a couple more in here. Just for funsies, I'm going to get a more complex kind of shape going. Oh, yeah. There's my... Okay. And let's say, all right, we'll come in here. Let's make our vertices go that way. Maybe we squish these in. Just pull them out. I can kind of toy with some of this a little bit. Maybe take this face, bring it in. Okay, I'm not creating anything in particular. I'm just trying to get something that's a little bit more complex than the cube. Okay. All right, so as I come in and I start to use my edge loop or my Swift, see how it's adhering to the shape? And it's giving me a nice loop around that shape, and it's maintaining the shape at the same time. It's helping me maintain the polyflow of my geometry. Additionally, by creating a full edge loop, it's also helping us maintain quads. We want that. We need to have that edge loop in order to maintain quads. Okay, so that the Swift loop is one that you'll probably use pretty frequently when you're modeling. It's a really nice tool. As an alternative, if we didn't want something to go all the way around our geometry, let's say we're doing kind of a little intricate thing in a particular portion, we can come in and we can use our cut tool. This allows us to freeform cut. So as I click from one edge to the next, I can make cuts around my geometry. And what you're going to notice is as I get close to a vertice, my cursor is going to change. Do you guys see that? From here to here. What happens is if I click on this now, it's merged, it has already merged those vertices for me. If I click really close, I now have two verts that are super close to each other but aren't actually merged. That may or may not be desired. But here's the thing. When you're doing edge loops like this or you're doing cuts, is this polyface a quad still? What do you guys think?
Well, the one on that's highlighted is the one on the left.
Is it? How do you guys know? How do you guys know whether or not it's a quad or not?
Because you can count the edges.
Okay. Or vertices. How many vertices make up this face? Watch what happens. Is it still a quad? So you have to be conscious of that. I have a quad here and a quad here. This is now no longer a quad because that edge loop is not complete. Same over here. Looks like a quad. Is it a quad? Nope.
Because it's based on the vertex, not on the edge.
Yep. Well, it is based on the...
ultimately that becomes the edge.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Ultimately, I mean, yes, it is also based on, but yes, I see where your thought is. Yeah. So when in doubt, look at the vertices. Because what will happen when you're modeling sometimes is you're going to get stray vertices, like you deleted an edge and you forgot, or you didn't realize the vertice didn't delete along with it. It's still a non-quad. It's going to look at that vertice and still treat it as if that edge is there, whether or not you're seeing it or not. So always, when in doubt, if you're not sure if your polyface is a quad, go into vert mode and see how many vertices are attached to it. That's going to tell you really quick.
So, like in that situation, if you wanted to have a shape kind of like, what would you do? How would you make it a quad?
You would still want to extend this edge loop all the way around. Let's say I want to pull out that diamond shape. I want to bring it out. I can still do that if I have an edge moving through it. So here's an alternative. So real quick before I kind of go too far off the side here. If I wanted to end my cut tool, I would want to make sure that I'm ending it in a location that is attaching to something. So let's go back to my cut tool. So I would maybe want to start it. Oops. Definitely don't want that. Uh-oh. It's interesting. It's seeing it, and yet it's not recognizing it. Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. Quick fix. We'll talk about quick fixes like this here in a second. Although, it's not. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to get you guys rocking and rolling on this. So, all right. So with our cut tool, start in a corner if you're going to use it like that, or have a very specific plan of attack. You generally don't want to cut it so that you have, or leave it so that you have non-quads. You want to fix it so that it's, say I'm going around, and at some point I need to find a way to end this edge loop. So right now, I'm still okay. I might have, depending upon what I'm doing with this, I might not want to try right there, but I'm still in quads and tries. I would much rather have something like this than an edge loop that just stopped in the middle of this, and now I've got an end-gon sitting here, like we had before. All right. So you do have to be conscious when you're using your cut tool, that you're not creating stray or random vertices. All right. If you
Is it snap to?
Yes, you'll see your cursor change. So if I go into my cut tool again, see how as I hover over a vertice, how the cursor changes?
Mm-hmm.
That's letting me know that it's snapping to that vert. Yeah. Okay. Now if I have some edges that I don't like, I can go into edge mode and I can choose to remove them. All right. If I select an edge, I'm going to want to use my remove option. That should also remove associated vertices. Should. No, it sure didn't on that one though. Okay, so just make sure you double check that. In addition to that quick cut, we also have our quick slice. This one is not something you're going to probably use in your perspective view. And here's why. If I wanted to make a cut across here, it makes cuts on planes similar to cutting a piece of cake. So it's going to take perspective into account. Not so useful in the perspective view. But if you go into an orthographic view and you want to make a cut this way, straight across, that makes much more sense.
And again, you do that by hitting space, moving between the
Yeah,
different
I'm just hitting my space bar and moving in and out of them using my space bar. That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right, let's get a fresh piece of geometry here. Okay. So those are our three main cutting tools. Probably won't need a whole lot beyond that in terms of cutting or adding edges. Those three will get you a very, very, very long way. And I usually don't deviate from those three a whole lot, to be honest with you. The one other tool, though, that I do use to make cuts, it's probably the most, outside of the Swift Loop cutting tool, this next one is the one I use a lot. And it's called extrude. What it will do is it will take a face and extrude it out from its current location. So let's say, for example, I'm going to add some more edge loops in here. So we've got some more stuff to work with. Okay. Let's say I want to extend this face out. What's that?
Is there a hotkey for Swift?
Is there? There are some extended controls for it, but I don't know if there's a hotkey specifically for. We could probably look it up. There might be. You could certainly assign one to it. Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to just go into the Max documentation and ask how to assign a hotkey to something. The only thing you have to be careful of when you do that is that you're not reassigning another hotkey from something else and that you need later, and it's like, oh, oops. And then you have to reestablish that, and then it just becomes this daisy chain of stuff. So, all right, so let's say right now I wanted to move this face. Well, if I move this face up right now, it's going to take everything else around it with it. What I'd really like to do is extend it up, right? This is where extrude comes into play. So if I go into my polygon menu, I've got an option for extrude. And in doing that, I can now extend or add to that face. And every time I click and drag, I am now adding a new extrude. What's also nice, or is a nice little side hotkey that you guys want to keep in mind, is G on your keyboard. For many of the tools like extrude, if you hit G, it's going to repeat whatever the last tool is that you used. So for extruding, it becomes really helpful. If I hit G again, now I can just go in right into my extrude tool and I don't have to keep coming up here and clicking on it. All right. So let's say I wanted to create, I'm going to back out of this real quick here. Let's say I wanted to create a trash can. So this kind of goes, this is somewhat actually in line, Aurora, with what we were talking about earlier with your chest. Let's say I want to create like a little trash can with this. Now let's give it a little bit more shape. Let's make it kind of like that. And now what I'd like to do is I would like to give it some depth. Well, here's the problem, and we're going to talk more about this, more about these errors next week. But if I were to extrude this down onto itself, not only does it not really adhere to the shape very well, I could make it that way. What I actually have is I have polys sitting on top of other polys in exact same space. I don't typically want that, and I don't have any thickness to this. One of the things that you guys will constantly fight is getting rid of CG perfection. It's really straight lines, really sharp lines. We don't actually see it, objects like this in reality. We have to break it up. So, as an alternative to just taking that face and squishing it down, we need to give it a little bit of thickness and then push it down. There are a couple ways we could do this. We could use our extrude tool and just scale it in, but Max has a nice little tool called inset. So if I click on this, it's this inset button. And it's going to allow me to make that cut and create a little bit of thickness. Now I can go in and I can extrude down, and now I have thickness for that piece of geometry. Adjust this as I go. Maybe I want to push that in, and I can push this down. Okay. I can always adjust things after the fact. For example, let's say I wanted the thickness to be a little thinner than what I ended up going with. Well, one of the things I could do is go into my orthographic view. I can grab the vertices associated with that thickness. Okay. I do want to not necessarily grab the base of it. And now I can scale those however I want. I can scale them in, I can scale them out. Maybe in my orthographic here, I'm going to squish them back that way, squish it back that way. Oops. My perspective gets so weird. Huh. It's interesting. Okay. Ah, there we go. Okay. Ah, what is happening here? Huh. It's interesting. Okay. This is one of those moments where it's like, okay, technology, what are you doing to me here?
Can you press home?
No, it's weird. Okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just create a new scene. Huh. That's why saving often helps. The other thing I found that you guys might want to also be aware of, this is the case for not only Max, but also Maya. 17 is buggy. So if you guys are using 2017, save often.
We have 16 at home.
16 should be fine.
Should we just not? Can we transfer work from 17 and 16?
Yes. Yes, you can.
I was gonna just
There we go. Yeah, I have. See, what? I don't even have anything in my scene right now. Okay. Just gonna. When in doubt, when stuff like that happens, close it and reopen it. This is where the auto back comes really handy. But yeah, I have found for both Maya and Max 16, or excuse me, 17 to be super, super buggy. So, just open it back up.
Automatically download 18 for me at home. Should I just like?
I haven't toyed with 18 yet. Usually when they come out with new versions really fast like that, I give it time before I switch. Like I'm using 16 still on most of my stuff at home, just to avoid dealing with the bugs. And then eventually when they update all, and you have the service packs, and then I go in and I start updating stuff. But I've noticed that, yeah, see, there we go. I've noticed that in 16, they did a lot of leaps and they did a big jump from the previous iteration for both programs. And then in 17, they're kind of expanding on some of that stuff. And as a result, the 16 bugs still aren't really completely resolved, in my opinion. And so I think kind of just compounding, I think, the issue. But best thing I can tell you guys is this is not an uncommon thing to this particular type of work. Just make sure you're saving frequently. All right. Okay. All right, so we're back. Any questions with the extrude and what that's doing? Do a lot with extrude. Pushing and pulling faces out. That's what you're doing with extrude. That inset is also a nice little feature. You could use your extrude tool to do the same thing. If we had our face here, and we go into our extrude. Now, one thing I want you to take a peek at is everything on the ribbon is meant to represent frequently used tools. But frequently used from where is the question. The answer to that is your modifier. You're going to find almost all of those same tools over here. So the added benefit, however, to accessing them in your stack is that we have options, or we have the ability to go into the options. We can do that here. You're going to find the little arrows. If we click on the little arrows for the tool, it's going to say, do we want to go into the extrude settings? And I'm going to say yes. This is going to pull up a widget where we can interactively adjust as we are going. Okay. So for this, if I change this to a value of 0, hit OK, I still extruded, right? Now before we get too far ahead of ourselves, this is a really good opportunity to look at some of the tools or look at the visual cues that we pulled up earlier. So I'm going to turn on my overlapping vertices. Right now, it's telling me that I have 8 vertices overlapping, and it's highlighting them for me in my viewport. This is a problem. If I see this, I want to fix it.
And that's because of how you extruded it?
I extruded it, yeah. I still created that extra face. I just never moved it. And as a result, I have 2 faces sitting on top of each other like this in space. That's not something you want. Here's why. One of the reasons why. Let's say I wanted to smooth this down. Okay. I'm going to create, this is one that has the extra face on it. I'm going to create another block or another cube that doesn't have the extra face. Okay. Let's convert it. All right. We have an option. You guys don't need to mess with this right now, but I do have the ability to come in here and smooth my geometry. And if I smooth a cube, right now, this is what happens. Look what happens, or look at the difference if I do the exact same tool on the cube with the extra face. Right? So that's what that extra face is doing. What it's doing is it's actually reinforcing what's underneath it, which is what's giving us that flat surface. Now, we will go in and we will reinforce surfaces in order to get definition like that, but never are we going to do it by putting faces right directly on top of each other. Does that make sense? So you want to adjust this kind of thing. Okay. And we'll talk about next week. We're going to start with identifying poly errors and how do we fix them. And this would be considered a poly error. All right. All right, let's turn our turbo smooth off here. So back to creating the inset with an extrude tool. Now if I go in and I go back to my face mode and I scale this in, I've now done the exact same thing as I did with the inset tool. You can totally do that. And this honestly is the way I'm used to doing it. Inset was not an option when I started this. So it's kind of a nice little tool, but I don't really find this actually to play as nice as I do with the extrude. So like I said, let's do this one. Oh, that's playing a little nicer. So that, same result as that, just using 2 different tools.
You just selected the face and then scaled it,
I just scaled it in on itself, yeah.
and it created.
Yep, exactly. So let's grab this face and do the same thing. So if I go to my extrude, I choose a 0 option in the extrude feature, and I hit OK. And I grab that face and I just scale it in.
So you're using extrude, not scale.
Extrude, yeah. So I extruded the face and then I scaled it down. It's doing the exact same thing as this inset.
And then you would just raise or lower it.
Yeah, exactly. Now I can grab that face again, now extrude it, and now I can either pull it out, push it in, I can do whatever I want with it. Yep. Yeah, Dylan, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's kind of unrelated, but I was wondering if we could take the food break.
Oh, what? No. Are you guys dying? Yeah, you kind of are, huh? Okay. Yes. Well, yes, it'd have to be a short break because I want to get you rolling. We'll jump into lab. Well, can you wait 20? And then we'll be in lab time, and then you can grab what you want. Yeah? Or are you totally dying? Is your brain melting? Okay. Oh, there you go. I have snacks too. You need like a meal. All right. Well, we're getting there. We're almost done.
So I have a quick question before we move on to the next thing.
Uh-huh.
So I was messing around a little bit earlier around like deleting the polygons,
Uh-huh.
which can look kind of like, maybe we're in the middle.
Yeah, but you don't want to do that.
Yeah, what happens? And what is that?
Remember me telling you that about the normals having a facing angle? Well, if we could create a hole, we're now looking at a non-renderable side.
Okay.
That's why. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. All right. So, toy with some of those tools that we've talked about. I have them in your notes with some description and where they are. See what you can come up with regard to your vehicle using some of those tools. Just try them out. If nothing else, I want you to stick it on very simple geometry and just see what it does. Once you get a feel for that, then you can kind of start thinking about, okay, how can I use this tool to my advantage and create what I want to create? But I will tell you, most of the models that I create, I'm using exclusively the tools that I just showed you. I'm not deviating much from those tools. It's a lot of just making edges and where you're wanting them to be, and then pushing and pulling points. All right. Most of the things that you can find in the ribbon up here, you can find over here in the modifier stack for an editable poly. Okay. All right. Are there any questions with regard to your vehicle assignment?
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to bring in like a reference image?
Yes, there is. But I'm not going to show you right now. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. It's just going to... For this, I don't want you going that far. I really don't. I want you eyeballing it.
Just imagine.
Yep. Use a reference image, but look at your reference image and see if you are using a reference image. Look at the proportions of the image, and I'm going to give you a reference for your table and chairs, and I'm purposefully not letting you bring that into Max because I want you to be able to visually establish proportion and scale on your own first before we start doing that. Yeah. And there's some visual cues that we're going to look at in that reference image next week when we start looking at your table and chairs. It's good practice for you to recognize that stuff without having to rely, because not always are you going to have an image that you can pull into Max. And oftentimes when you're working and building stuff, you're not going to have it. So you have to be able to identify it in the visual that you do have accessible to you and make decisions based off of that. So it'll be good practice for you right now. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions related to your car scene? I can show you some past student examples. Would that be helpful to see what kind of things or level I'm expecting? Okay. Just to give you some ideas. I have some past stuff. Come on. There we go. Okay, and these are all kind of in varied levels of complexity and simplicity, but they're all just using really simple primitives. Right, nothing super complex, just getting a feel for the tools. Some of these are obviously a little bit more. This one's not as simple, but it was really cool when he did it, and I was like, oh man. Yeah, these ones are a little bit more complex. So You can take it to, like I said, all the way from, oops. This would be really simple to something like that if you want. Those of you who have had my modeling classes before, I'm just saying, I would expect you to not give me something at this level.
I just kind of wanted to
No. You have more knowledge now. I expect more. Right. But you guys get the idea, right? So it doesn't need to be super complex. The whole point of this assignment is for you to get used to working in Max, for you to get used to converting things to polys, naming things in your project structure, utilizing some of your modifier tools, and just exploring. I'm less concerned about this being perfect and, accurate and all that stuff. I'm more concerned with this particular assignment with you just exploring 3ds Max. Does that make sense? Getting some real basic stuff out of the way, getting your foundation out of the way. Because I guarantee you next week, we're going to be off and running, making some tables and some chairs and making a little scene for our VR stuff we're going to put into the headset the following week. Okay? Okay. The other assignment that we'll talk about, we'll take a break first and then we'll walk you through it. It's should be hopefully pretty easy for you guys, especially after the stuff we just talked about. I'm going to demo it and have you do it with me. So I really anticipate that you'll have the 75% of it done before you walk out of here today. And it's a quick one, right? It's a quick thing just to show you a couple tools. What we're going to do is we're going to create some accessories onto our spacecraft that we pulled into our Unity scene last week. So there is a 3ds Max file on Basecamp that I included for this. It just gives us the framework for the ship, and we're just going to add to that. So when you download that file, all you need to do is pull it into your project structure. Now, I don't have a project structure yet created for our spacecraft, so I'm going to create one because it's a new project. So who can walk me through creating the project structure? Tell me where to go. Yeah. Yeah, Austin, show me.
It's the 3D Max.
Okay. Good.
Manage.
Good. Good. All right. I'm creating a new one. What do I need to do next? What's next?
Click on the file folder or community one.
Yeah, so I'm going to, wherever I want to navigate it to, I'm going to select that first. Then I'm going to choose Make New Folder. So for this one, I'm going to name it Dunsire Nikki underscore, and I'm going to call this ship. Doesn't make any difference to me as long as I can tell what project you're talking about. Spacecraft, ship, mothership, I think is what it's called in Unity. And I want to make sure that once I have that, it's selected. Oops. And I should see on my desktop now. Didn't name properly, so I'm just renaming it. Okay, there we go. I should now have a project structure for this. So to bring in the file that we're going to use or start with, all you need to do is copy that scene file over to your scenes folder of the project structure that you create, and then you can open it up. So now I'm going to choose File, Open. I don't need to save my current. Navigate to the projects, the scenes folder for my current project and hit Open. And what I'm going to have is just my basic little hull of the ship that I brought in, that we brought into the Unity file. It's on Basecamp. Yeah, it's on Basecamp if you guys download it. Okay. All right. So, before we start adding some things to it, and what we'll add will be pretty simple. Okay. And then what your assignment will be to take what we add and expand upon it, and just be creative with it. Something a little bit more complex, utilizing your cutting tools that we talked about. So to give you some ideas, I also have some past student examples of this. So they've gone in and just added some extra pieces. Yeah. This was Dylan's first attempt. I expect more. But very nice. Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah. Yeah. So someone went a little bit above and beyond, but yeah. Okay. All right. Before we do that, though, let's take a break. You guys need it. Let's take a quick 15. 15? Yeah, that'll be enough to stretch your legs, grab a snack. We'll zip through this real quick, and then you guys will be out of here. Okay? So it is 4:50 right now. Come back at 5 after.
Where did you put that seat in the?
It is in your
It's in the docs and files and things.
No, I got that. I just mean you put it in the seat.
oh, scenes folder. Yeah, scenes folder. Yep.
So what's left that we're learning?
What's that?
What else are we learning before we're headed out?
We're going to do our array duplicating and positioning to set you up to finish this piece of homework.
Yeah, because this is very similar to some of the stuff I've done in like SolidWorks.
Okay.
So, because I was just curious. So a lot of this I feel like I'm just getting a little bit of deja vu.
Deja vu. Well, you're going to have that if you're bouncing in and out of programs.
Okay.
I imagine there's some folks that are feeling some of the similarity with Blender, but
Mhm. So we're
not-
doing array and duplication.
yeah, duplicating with arrays.
Okay.
So duplicating with special, talking about instances, talking about grouping and parenting this, utilizing some of the cut tools to create the legs. So we're basically going to create the space, the rest of the spacecraft that was in the Unity scene that you guys did for the
Mhm.
rollerball. And then what I want you guys to do is I want you to add to that. So
Okay.
yeah, that's it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it'll go by pretty fast. Yeah, especially the stuff we just talked about.
So what you're about to show in the notes at all?
What's that?
Is it in your notes?
No. This
Okay.
is not. This is you're going walking through it with me kind of thing.
Do you have, are you recording now?
Yes.
I haven't.
Yeah. It'll be in the recording. So if you need to take off, you can.
I do, unfortunately.
Which reminds me of